The July heat in Jacksonville, Mississippi, hung over the city like a heavy curtain. The air reeked of dusty earth, hot asphalt, and smoke. Jamal Brooks, a 25-year-old black man, walked out of a grocery store carrying a bag with bread, milk, and bananas. He had just gotten off a double shift at the nursing home where he worked as a janitor. His back ached, his hands were dry from bleach, and his uniform smelled faintly of disinfectant. But he smiled faintly, thinking of his younger sister Kayla, who loved bananas and waited at home with a list of TV shows she'd recorded to watch together. He didn't know that in a few minutes, everything would fall apart. As he approached the intersection of Elm and Fisher, a police cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. Its red and blue lights pulsed in the heavy air, but no siren blared. Two white officers stepped out. Thomas Harding, a hardened veteran with a reputation for aggression, and Brian Kelly, a fresh-faced rookie still unsure of his footing. Harding's boots hit the ground like hammers. "Stop right there, sir. Suspicion of theft. Show us the contents of the bag and your ID," Harding barked, his voice sharp, already tinged with accusation. Jamal's brow furrowed in confusion. "I just bought this. Here's the receipt," he said, his voice even, holding out the slip of paper. Harding didn't even glance at it. Instead, he slapped Jamal's hand, sending the grocery bag flying, bread bursting from its sleeve, the milk carton bursting open on the pavement, white liquid pooling like blood. The bananas rolled toward the gutter. Harding grabbed Jamal by the shirt and slammed him against the squad car. "Hands behind your back." "Wait! What's going on? I didn't do anything," Jamal cried, struggling, not to fight, but to understand. "Stop resisting!" Harding shouted, raising his baton. He struck Jamal's side once, hard, then again across the back. The sickening thud echoed down the street. Blood trickled down from Jamal's brow, mixing with sweat. He gasped as his arm was twisted behind him, a pop and a searing pain. He screamed. A small crowd began to gather. Phones were raised. An elderly woman clutched her chest. A teenage boy shouted, "He didn't do nothing." A young mother tried to shield her child's eyes. Brian Kelly hesitated. His eyes darted between Harding and the bystanders. His mouth opened, then closed. He said nothing. "Call the paramedics," someone yelled. But the officers didn't respond. As Jamal lay on the hot pavement, handcuffed and bleeding, he locked eyes with a little girl watching from a nearby stoop. Her eyes were wide with fear. Jamal's own eyes filled with tears, screams, sirens, silence. Before the baton, before the cell, before the courthouse. Jamal Brooks had been a quiet boy growing up in the Riverview neighborhood, a working-class black enclave nestled between two freight lines and a closed-down shoe factory. His mother worked nights at a textile plant, his father gone before Jamal was old enough to spell his name. Most days, it was just him and Kayla. She was 6 years younger and endlessly curious. Jamal learned to cook macaroni and cheese by the time he was 9 because Kayla hated the boxed kind. He helped her with homework, braided her hair when their mom was too tired, and read to her from the tattered library books he checked out each week. He was a quiet kid, with big eyes and a gentle voice. He loved to draw, often sketching superheroes, not the caped ones, but nurses, bus drivers, and janitors with glowing hands who could fix anything. When a neighbor's cat got stuck in a tree, Jamal was the one who climbed it. When Kayla had asthma attacks at night, he'd sit by her bed counting her breaths until morning. At 14, he got his first job sweeping up at a barber shop. At 16, he was briefly suspended for shoving a boy who had called Kayla a slur. He took the punishment quietly. but that was the first time someone labeled him violent. He never forgot it. His dreams of art school were shelved when his mother got sick. He started working full-time at the nursing home, sending most of his paycheck home. Still, every Friday night, he brought home bananas and milk, Kayla's favorites, their tradition, their glue. Jamal had lived with his back against the wall long before the police ever pushed him there. Jamal awoke in a holding cell with fluorescent lights buzzing above. His ribs throbbed, his wrist was wrapped in gauze, and dried blood crusted near his hairline. A nurse had seen him briefly, muttering something about a sprain and mild concussion. No apology, no explanation. He was charged with 3 misdemeanors: assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace. When public defender Marion Roberts arrived the next morning, Jamal was curled on the bench in the corner. She stood silently for a moment, studying him. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and calm, with streaks of silver in her dark hair. She had spent the last 15 years fighting cases others wouldn't touch. Before she was the unshakable attorney seated beside Jamal Brooks, Marion Roberts was a teenager on the south side of Chicago, the daughter of a school teacher and a sanitation worker. She remembered the sirens that never stopped screaming, the police lights that bled through bedroom curtains like intrusive ghosts. When she was 15, her older brother Darnell was arrested during a traffic stop. Wrong place, wrong time. The cops said he matched the description. At the precinct, he was beaten so badly he couldn't see out of his left eye for weeks. No charges were filed, no apologies given. Just a hospital bill and a silence that wrapped around their family like plastic over a wound. At 17, Marion joined her high school's debate team, where she learned how words could cut sharper than any blade, and how they could protect. She read Baldwin and Bell Hooks, watched the Anita Hill hearings on a grainy TV in the back of a classroom, and vowed never to be quiet when power turned violent. Law school at Howard University followed. There she spent weekends working with civil rights clinics. She interned with the Innocence Project. And then she came south, to Mississippi. Not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. In Jackson County, she lost her first case. A teenage boy accused of stealing a bike he had actually owned. No video, no witnesses, just the officer's word. She wept in her car afterward, then got up the next day and filed an appeal. Over the years, she built a reputation. Tenacious, methodical, unafraid to stare down the bench or the badge. But every win came with a cost. Burnout, threats, moments of despair. The morning she took Jamal's case, Marion had been considering quitting. Then she saw the footage. Jamal slammed to the ground, the bananas in the gutter, the blood, the silence, and something snapped back into focus. She saw her brother again, and she remembered why she had started. She sat, opening a manila folder and pulling out a tablet. I've seen the videos. Eyewitness footage. About 7 different angles. They tell a different story than the official report. Jamal nodded slowly. I didn't even raise my voice until he hit me. I know. She showed him one of the clips. The moment his hand was slapped, groceries flying, the baton, the crowd screaming. Jamal watched in silence, jaw clenched. Across the table, Marion's assistant, Marcus, a black law student interning for the summer, took notes, his fingers tight around his pen. They're going to spin this, Marion said quietly. They'll pull up everything. School fights, the shoplifting ticket when you were 16, even the time you got into a yelling match with a teacher. They'll paint you as violent, dangerous. Jamal let out a breath. It's like they planned this before I said a word. They did. Meanwhile, across town in a paneled conference room, City Prosecutor Randolph Smith leaned back in his leather chair, flanked by police union lawyers, law enforcement brass, and a few well-dressed donors. "This guy's no angel," Smith said, tapping Jamal's juvenile record. "We can make this stick. All we need is a witness to say he resisted. Throw in the rookie's hesitation. We spin it as confusion in the face of aggression." "Won't this blow back?" one of the donors asked. "People are filming, tweeting. Protests are heating up." Smith shrugged. "Jacksonville wants order. I'll give them that. One more incident won't tip the scales." That week, murals of Jamal's bleeding face began appearing under bridges and alleyways. Social media exploded. Pastors, teachers, and mothers took to the streets. Two stories began to form. One of chaos and danger, and one of injustice and pain. And between them stood a courtroom, waiting to decide which version of the truth would prevail. The courtroom was packed. Outside, protests raged. Signs read, "Justice for Jamal. Cops kill us." Reporters swarmed. Presiding over the case was Judge Joseph Miller, elderly, with a reputation as a moderate conservative. The American flag behind his bench drooped like it too was weary of these cases. Day 1. Officers took the stand. Harding said, "He was aggressive. We followed protocol." His tone was clipped, his face a mask. He didn't flinch when the footage played. Brian Kelly trembled, avoiding Jamal's gaze. When asked to confirm Harding's account, he hesitated. I'm not sure," he mumbled. His voice cracked. Then came the videos. The courtroom gasped. Marion played them slowly, frame by frame. The jury saw Jamal's receipt flutter from his hand, the baton descending, the sound of screams, of sirens, of fear. The judge called for order 3 times. The bailiff had to escort out a sobbing woman who had recognized her voice among the bystanders. Marion brought in character witnesses, Jamal's co-workers, neighbors, and his sister. They described a gentle man who volunteered weekends, brought food to elders, and read bedtime stories to his niece. The contrast between their Jamal and the prosecution's image was stark. Expert testimony followed. A former police lieutenant, now an ethics instructor, testified about use of force guidelines. "This was brutality," she said. "There was no threat. No justification." The judge looked over his glasses at the jury. "This looks like excessive force, but does it amount to criminal misconduct?" Miller said aloud. The room went still. He scribbled a note to himself. Tensions rose. Outside, the crowd swelled. Ministers, activists, and students filled the courthouse steps, chanting, praying, singing. And inside, the trial continued. Truth unraveling, one witness, one frame, one tear at a time. The courtroom was silent. The jury had deliberated for 9 hours. Outside, a restless crowd murmured, their chants dimmed to a low, anxious hum. Inside, Jamal sat between Marion and Marcus, shoulders tense, eyes forward. Judge Miller re-entered from chambers. His robes seemed heavier than before. The bailiff took the slip of paper from the foreperson and handed it to the judge. He read it, then looked up. "Will the defendant please rise?" Jamal stood slowly. "On the charge of resisting arrest, how do you find the defendant?" The foreperson, A middle-aged black woman with firm eyes spoke clearly. Not guilty. A murmur rippled through the room. On the charge of assaulting an officer? Not guilty. A louder reaction. Someone gasped audibly. And on the charge of disturbing the peace? A beat of silence. Not guilty. The courtroom exploded, some in tears, others cheering. Jamal's knees buckled slightly. Marion gripped his arm to steady him, her eyes glistening. Judge Miller pounded the gavel. Order. I will have order. When silence returned, he addressed the court. The matter of potential misconduct by Officers Harding and Kelly is now under review by the state. This court's duty was to assess the charges against Mr. Brooks. He is free to go. The gavel fell once more. Outside, the doors burst open and the crowd erupted as Jamal stepped into the sunlight. Cameras flashed. Hands reached out. His sister Kayla ran into his arms, sobbing. He held her tightly. A minister shouted, "Let this be the beginning, not the end." And yet, not far away, Harding sat in his precinct office, unrepentant. Though suspended, he still wore his badge like armor. "It's a war out there," he muttered to no one. "But for the people in the streets, for Marion and Marcus, for Jamal and Kayla, something had shifted." Justice, for once, had bent, however briefly, toward truth. 1 year later, a new mural appeared on the wall outside the Jacksonville Community Center. It showed Jamal in profile, surrounded by children and elders, his face calm, his eyes resolute. Above him were the words, "He stood. We rose." Jamal now worked as a youth counselor at that very center, helping teens navigate a world that too often saw them as threats. He no longer walked hunched over. His voice had found strength. He smiled more. Marion Roberts had taken a sabbatical from the public defender's office to start a nonprofit, the Brooks Initiative, providing legal aid and media advocacy for victims of police brutality. Marcus, her former intern, was now in his final year at law school, writing a thesis on racial bias and use of force incidents. Officer Brian Kelly, after testifying in an internal inquiry, quietly resigned from the force. He moved north, became a teacher, and sometimes wrote anonymous op-eds about the systemic rot he'd witnessed. Thomas Harding was tried for excessive force, but acquitted on a hung jury. He retired early on a full pension. In public, he remained defiant. But those who knew him said he drank more now and kept his curtains drawn. As for the city of Jacksonville, change came slowly. A civilian review board was formed. Body cameras became mandatory. Training programs were overhauled. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Kayla, now a high school sophomore, started a podcast, K Talks Justice. Her first guest was her brother. "You think what happened to you changed the world?" she asked. Jamal thought for a moment. "No," he said, "but maybe it changed our corner of it." And that sometimes was enough.